Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and I want to start in a seemingly strange place. I want to go back to Homer's Odyssey, specifically Book 9. So there, Odysseus and his crew, they find themselves beached on an unknown island. So what Odysseus does is he sends three of his men to see if any sort of civilization exists out there. So what happens is that the men set out on their expedition and soon come across the Lotus Eaters, whom they find to be completely gentle and peaceful. In fact, the natives even offer the men some honey sweet lotus flowers and some fruits to eat. But as soon as they eat these things, the men fall into a state of euphoria, and they forget any thought of their duties. And the past or the future all of a sudden holds absolutely no meaning for them at all. Okay, now back on the shore, Odysseus is waiting and waiting. And he's getting impatient because the men he sent just aren't returning. And when he sends more men after them, they disappear too. So finally, then Odysseus himself goes to search for his men. And what does he discover? Well, he finds them among the Lotus Eaters in a state of lazy happiness and with absolutely no desire to ever return to the ships. So quickly sizing up the situation, Odysseus resists the temptation to eat the plant himself and instead forcibly carries each of his men, kicking and screaming, back to the ship. He ties them down and then he sails off to escape the land of the Lotus Eaters forever. Okay, now, through these passages, Homer touches upon a very relevant topic. That is the attraction of oblivion through the use of narcotics and drugs. It's only through the decisive judgment of Odysseus that his men are able to escape the addiction which wiped out their memories and ambitions and which caused them to live outside of time in a kind of pleasurable apathy, in a numbing condition which took away their humanity. Part of Homer's message then is pretty obvious. It's that a life marked purely by pleasure and by minimal friction, one where people drowse around contentedly all day, is one that should be combated at all costs. It's just not befitting of the life of a human being. Actually, the philosopher John Stuart Mill said something very similar. He said that it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Now his point was that what makes for a worthwhile human life is not just a life of ease and pleasure and desire gratification. No, in fact, a life full of ups and downs, of struggles and strivings, and of thoughtfulness and action, one where we're making greatest use of our distinctively human capacities, like Socrates did, is far more admirable and valuable than a life which resembles little more than one of being a pig, constantly satisfied and pampered. Actually, you know what? This reminds me of a very old story about the young Greek hero, Heracles, sometimes referred to as Heracles at the crossroads. So in that story, Heracles, who's trying to contemplate his future, finds himself at a crossroad where he has to choose between a life of ease and a life of hardship, where these two choices are personified by two women, one who's seductive and in revealing clothing, and the other who's marked by soberness and tact and discretion. Now, what's interesting here is that the life of ease is paired with pleasure and gratification, while the life of hardship is paired with virtue and character. Now, this makes sense. It makes sense because where there's minimal friction, when life is easy, there's little growth. There's little character building. In other words, virtue and struggle or hardship are intimately connected. Now, this is why we admire Odysseus. It's the severity of his life that makes it a glorious one. His decisions to act and to take risks put into effect the whole of his capacities and therefore make him stronger. This is precisely what the Lotus eaters lack then. I mean, in their life of ease and inactivity, it's not even clear that they have any character, let alone distinction. They might as well just be a bunch of pigs in a trough, redundant and inconsequential. Okay, but what does any of this have to do with Brave New World? Well, lots, I think. I mean, Huxley's dystopian world is one marked by absolute overcontentment, where the sole purpose of society is ease and pleasure and happiness. I mean, for one thing, free, promiscuous sexuality is encouraged at every stage of life, where it's said that everybody belongs to everybody else. And then the consumption of material pleasures is ensured throughout. And so there's no sense of delayed gratification. And then distraction and entertainment is set up around every single corner, including the feelies, those sense-immersed movies with easy-to-follow plots and spectacular effects. Actually, it's interesting. Those of the Brave New World, those people in that society, they acknowledge only two gods, Ford and Freud. Now, Ford, of course, refers to Henry Ford, the great originator of the assembly line and of mass production. And here he's clearly symbolic for the triumph of total, unending consumerism. The giant capitalist cog. And Freud? Well, we all know who that is, but why is he a god here? Well, because he represents the one who finally abolished shame by untying the world from the reality principle, and so opened up a full-throttle, unabashed return to the pleasure principle. Namely, to the immediate gratification of sexual desire in all of its forms. Okay, but maybe the most famous creation of Brave New World, one that makes absolutely sure that nobody experiences anything unpleasant ever, is that perfectly engineered, mood-altering drug, Soma. Now, this drug is readily available to anybody who needs it, and is good for any moment whatsoever. 1 gram for this, and 2 grams for that. I mean, you can even serve it with coffee. Now, what makes Soma so great is that, as it's mentioned in the story, it guarantees to provide all the advantages of alcohol and Christianity without any of their defects. It's the perfect drug that cures all the anguishes of space and time. Okay, now there's something a little bit eerie about all of this, no? The simulation feelies, the euphoria-inducing pills, everything is reduced to comfort and good feelings. Actually, you know what? This reminds me a lot of the philosopher Robert Nozick's famous thought experiment, the pleasure or experience machine. So just quickly, if you don't know it, basically what Nozick does there is he asks you to imagine a pleasure or experience machine that can stimulate your brain in such a way that it can give you the experience and therefore the pleasure of anything you'd like. Now, before you plug in, you can decide what experience you'd like to have. Like maybe you'd like to go skydiving, or you'd like to bike across the world. And then it's going to be just as if you were doing those things. In other words, it feels exactly like you were actually skydiving, and it gives you the same pleasure. Now, what Nozick seems to suggest is that most of us would actually hesitate to step inside the machine, especially for long periods of time, because in there we're not actually doing or achieving anything, even though it seems like we are. No, all we're actually doing is feeling. And, well, feeling isn't enough. In other words, there are things, certain human goods, that matter more than just how things feel from the inside, so to speak. Which is to say, what most of us want is to be connected to reality and to truth, and to actually face challenges, and not just be passive receivers of pleasure. Okay, well, I think this is one reason why most of us don't find Brave New World an ideal one, to say the least. It's because whether it's Soma or the Feelies, everyone's been manipulated into wanting only passive pleasure. Like the Lotus Eaters, there is no ideal here higher than good feeling. And so these are deeply impoverished human lives. Ultimately, what Brave New World does is it shows us what a truly apathetic and dehumanized future really looks like. Although, to be honest, it has to be said that what really makes the story an eerie one is that Huxley's future looks a little bit like our world today. That is, there are shadows of our society in Huxley's vision of the future. I mean, think about it. Our group mentality, our consumer society, our escape into the distractions of entertainment, our push to eradicate any uncomfortable emotions and moods, often through the use of medications. All of this to make passive living and good feeling alone supreme. And in the story, this is what John the Savage laments. He laments the brave new world he sees because, as he says, everybody's happy nowadays. In other words, he notices that the sole purpose of society there is just to be happy. Now, nobody seems to question this, but he does. John dares to imagine, first of all, that there might be more to happiness than good feeling or maximizing positive sensations. What he does is he yearns for a higher state of consciousness, one that's compatible with suffering and the full spectrum of human emotions and moods. In fact, he proclaims that he has the right to be unhappy. What's more, he says, I don't want comfort. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. In other words, what he's saying is that the price paid for the thin happiness that everybody is after in the brave new world is just too high. It requires the sacrifice of humanity and its underlying depth. Actually, this is why he ends up throwing away the soma and eventually kills himself. Because it's the only way to safeguard his dignity in the face of the alternative, which is to say, giving it up to become a happy automaton of the brave new world. Now, Huxley wasn't the only one to notice that there's an oppressive drive towards a blanket and a kind of facile happiness lurking at the heart of our society. I mean, Nietzsche before him warned us of something very similar. That's to say, the happiness that Huxley warns us of is also the happiness of Nietzsche's last men, which is a happiness completely severed from any attachments to things like character and self-development and transcendence. It's a happiness reduced to the bottom line of an apathy drowning in good feeling. Actually, Nietzsche had his precedents here too. And a good one is Aristotle. I mean, for one, Aristotle thought that it was just impossible to be happy if you were asleep or just sitting around. And that's because for him, happiness was fundamentally an activity. It meant getting out into the world and testing yourself against it. But it also had something to do with filling out your potential as a human being. And how on earth can you do that if you're asleep or zonked out most of the time? Anyway, so back to John the Savage. So in the thematic climax of the novel, John is talking to Mustafa Mond, the world controller for Western Europe. Now, what's really interesting about their discussion is how similar it is to the discussion between Jesus and the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. So in the Brothers Karamazov discussion, part of the Grand Inquisitor's message to Jesus is that people don't need him anymore. They don't need Jesus. Because really, they don't want to be free. They just want to be happy. And that's just what the church has done. Through the provision of material goods and submission to authority, they have placated the people. In other words, people will gladly give up their freedom for happiness. Well, this is basically what Mustafa Mond tells John the Savage. He tells him that love and literature and liberty are things that have to be sacrificed if you want to serve the ultimate goal of stability and happiness. To accomplish all lasting social happiness, all else must be given up, he says. Shakespeare must go, because high art is subversive and just doesn't fuel society. No, what matters are things that don't mean anything at all, but which do provide immediate gratification. Like feelies and drugs. Now, John the Savage, even though he can't match Mustafa's intelligence and his education, knows that there's something deeply wrong with this. Which is why he says to Mustafa, he says, "But isn't there anything in living dangerously?" And then, as I mentioned earlier, he continues and says, "Nope. I want the right to live unhappily. I want the right to grow old and the right to be tormented by unspeakable pains." So what John is doing then is he's questioning the idea that a shallow happiness is a worthwhile price to rid the world of suffering and uncertainty and freedom. In other words, he knows that whatever happiness is, it must have a meaning beyond the play of the senses and the eradication of the unpleasant and the foreign. No, if happiness of the brave new world is the one sovereign good, a sovereign that now rules without any other candidates, then, well, this is an impoverished king unworthy to lead those of us who want to hold on to the only thing that really matters, our humanity. Bye for now.